Is fear of pushback holding you back? Personal and legal repercussions for telling the truth about our lives are a common worry for writers of creative nonfiction and memoir. Today, I want to share two techniques that are going to help you honor your story while still protecting your privacy and anonymity. I'm Nicole Breit, award-winning author and the creator of the Spark Your Story Lab, and I help writers craft their best work and share it with the world. Let's dive in so you can stop worrying about what might happen if you tell your story and start finally getting those stories you're burning to tell on the page. Have you ever felt a push-pull tension when you have a new story idea? You want to write it, but what if someone reads it? Maybe you feel called to write about an experience, but you're really unsure about how many of the details to share. Or maybe you want to tell the truth about a part of your life, but that means implicating another person. Tell me in the chat, have you ever tried to solve this problem by writing your story as fiction, but tweaking the details seemed to kind of suck the life and energy out of the story? Hit the like button or type an all caps yes in the comments if you've ever done this. All right, so let's dive into those two techniques. So the first technique I'd like to share with you, I call suggest, don't tell. And I'd like to show you an example from a prose poem called Charlie from Notes on Leaving. This is a book of poems by Laisha Rosnow. And this poem, Charlie, is about the transition from girlhood to womanhood, the narrator's experience of this transition. So as a grown daughter, as an adult woman, she is reflecting back now on her teens. And she's writing about this awareness she has of her mother's fears at the time, as well as her own awareness of danger and desire. There's a recurring image of Charlie perfume and cigarettes, and together these symbols evoke mood and atmosphere. This piece is really immersive. So these craft elements are doing the heavy lifting of telling a story that in the end is only suggested. We know something happens that this piece is leading up to by the end, but it is never spelled out. So here is an excerpt at the very end. You must have hoped that I would leave that place unscathed, never falling for taunts and lures, invitations into back seats and truck beds, that I would follow a trail of Charlie perfume and magazine promises right out of town. You were right, of course, about so many things, but I could sure use a cigarette now. Don't worry, I've quit. And besides, I would never smoke in front of you. So the narrator is addressing her mother. And that sentence that I've bolded for emphasis, I think contains all of the weight of what must have taken place, but is never spelled out for us. You were right, of course, about so many things. You were right to have worried, but I could sure use a cigarette now. The entire poem evokes tension around the idea of the possibility of being lured for a young woman. The focus in the poem isn't on an instance when the narrator may have been preyed upon, but that possibility is embedded in the sentences. This relieves the writer of revisiting a difficult experience by taking it head on and spelling out all the details, as well as the implications of naming someone who may have preyed upon the narrator. So that's often a concern for writers, not wanting to tell their story because they're afraid of what the implications might be if someone is named or if someone is recognized. So my question for you in your writing, is there an event in your life you could write about by focusing mostly on theme and atmosphere to tell a story or suggest an experience, only offering one clue at the end to what actually happened? How could you use this technique in your own writing? The second technique I'd like to share, I call before and after, and I'm going to share an excerpt with you from a work of creative nonfiction called The Unfaithful Triptych by Monet Patrice Thomas. So a triptych essay, if you're not familiar, is written in 3 parts. This one is about the narrator's betrayal of her boyfriend. So we are shown the aftermath of that betrayal in the first section. In the second section, we see the events that led right up to that decision.
of the betrayal. And then in the final section, we see the events that followed the next day. So an affair is implied, but the details of what transpired are never shared in this piece, only the emotional repercussions for the narrator and the before and after details that she chooses to include. So here's an excerpt from the second section. She leaned in. Later, she would know this was when everything changed. Before, she'd been a girl with a boyfriend out of town, and he'd been just a friend, and they were celebrating being in the same city for one last night. And then his long fingers were caressing the soft lines of her face, and her nose was full of plucked flower. I just love the elegance of this writing. I like how she's reflecting and saying later she would know this was when everything changed. This was the tipping point. Before this happened, she'd been a girl with a boyfriend out of town, and then this happened. And that is enough for us. We don't need to know more than that. The essay brings us into scenes that took place before and after that moment. The focus is on how the betrayal affects the narrator and the events that led up to it. We're brought into this descriptive scene that reflects on the moment things changed. But what happened is only ever implied. We never see the act of betrayal. So I think that there's a really rich example in this writing for writers who also have material that is sensitive, or they may not want to write in great detail about what exactly happened, but you can still tell your story. So is there an event in your life you could write about by focusing on your experience, your emotional experience, and the before and after, letting the reader in only as much as you feel comfortable sharing?
I hope these techniques that I've shared with you have you feeling excited about the possibilities of telling your stories in a new way. One last thought I wanted to share. Some writers that I've taught in my courses have told me that they feel bad about avoiding, that if they're not writing about a story in all of the details, including everything that happened, they feel somehow that they're shortchanging their reader. I think it is entirely your choice how much you share with your readers, and that it is healthy to have some boundaries around what you do disclose. You need to feel comfortable with the work that you put out in the world and share with other readers. I'd love to know if these techniques that I shared were helpful to you. Would you please let me know in the comments by typing which technique you are most excited to try, before and after, or suggest don't tell. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.